I'm Dr. Sabrina Siegel with the Neuroscience Education Institute. Welcome to the NEI Podcast. September is the American Medical Association's Women in Medicine Month. So in this episode of the NEI Podcast, we'll be taking a look back at some of the incredible women in medicine we've had on our show. Let's begin by reflecting on episode 69, A Beacon of Hope in the Storm of Mental Illness, an update on suicide awareness and prevention with Dr. Christine Moutier. Dr. Moutier is the Chief Medical Officer at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and it's been an honor to have her on our show several times. In this segment, we discuss the risk factors associated with suicide, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. What are some of the risk factors for suicide, and how could these be different during this challenging time in the midst of this global pandemic?
Great question. The research is actually really pretty clear about several things around the topic of suicide and specifically risk factors, that it's never going to be just one risk factor on its own, that it's a convergence of this sort of dynamic interplay between somebody who in most cases does have a mental health condition and oftentimes unaddressed or undertreated, that then is intersecting with things like their genetics, their early childhood experiences of past trauma, their own psychological tendencies to catastrophize or to be overly self-punitive, and all of this happening in the context of real life stressors going on. And so stressors such as bullying, relationship dysfunction, job loss and financial strain, legal problems, shame and humiliation are hugely prominent in the suicide risk, sort of this perfect storm that I'm describing. And other things that we can also become more aware of are that while we know our loved ones and our colleagues or our friends in this moment, this slice in time that we're living within them, we need to start thinking about our own health and mental health and suicide risk and prevention from the standpoint of what has happened in our past. What does that family history look like in terms of a parent that the person grew up with who had untreated depression that affected their childhood growing up, or an uncle who had died by suicide? All of those are known risk factors. And again, so kind of putting it into the frame of the moment we're in related to COVID, all of those things are still 100% relevant. And now some of the experiences people are having with anxiety, fear, losses of all different sorts during COVID, grief, financial strain, and even just simply like the routine aspects of our lives being sort of turned upside down. There are some upsides to that for many people, but for many others, it has not been a positive thing. And so all of that can really press on a number of those risk factors that I mentioned, including, for example, somebody who has pre-existing depression or an anxiety disorder or PTSD or history of trauma or loss. And now they're in this moment where there are increases in reasons to feel anxious, to feel isolated, and to experience loss or those tremendous psychosocial strains like financial crisis and job loss. So there are also the circumstances where people who don't live in homes that are even safe. So if there is a situation where there's intimate partner violence, child abuse, or elder abuse, those are other specific circumstances that are extremely worrisome right now without the usual safeguards. We're learning as a society how to create better safety nets and safeguards with regard to all of those things. But so those are some of the ways that I look at the risk factors for suicide and how it lines up right now in this moment.
It was so helpful to be able to focus on such a critical and timely topic in the beginning of the pandemic, when clinicians and patients needed mental health resources more than any other time, and when awareness of mental health conditions became a primary concern for all of us. Next, let's turn to episode 77, called Mental Health in the Muslim Community with Dr. Mona Massoud. In this piece, we discuss mental health in female Muslim Americans And we talk about the difference between religious influences and cultural impacts, and how misunderstandings about these differences by the American community might impact mental health. Let's listen in. What about female Muslim Americans? What sorts of challenges do they face?
Sure. And so with women in America and Muslim women in America, we have, again, that intersection at play of our cultural backgrounds. And each country has such different cultural norms and behaviors surrounding women and femininity and identity and all of these kind of things that they are most of the time having to navigate that rather than the aspect of being a Muslim woman. What I mean by that is there are very particular, I would say actually liberties that are almost by law in our religion for what women have rights, and we have very specific rights regarding money, regarding our own well-being, regarding working, regarding if we want to have families or not. And these are actually, for us, from a religious perspective, it's very empowering. However, what we find, and this is kind of the common thing you'll find when you're speaking to Muslim women, is that when we add the extra layer of the culture that we're from, that we will find that there is a patriarchal overtone that was never meant to be in the faith, but became a part of it as a way of establishing a power dynamic in the cultures we left behind. And so when it comes to the common tropes we see about Muslim women in the media where, oh, this person was told to cover, or this person was told to marry so-and-so or not go out or not have a job, those things are coming from a toxic patriarchal structure that is not inherent in the religion or the jurisprudence of the religion. It is inherent in the cultural norms that the person is from. And the beauty of being a Muslim woman in America is that we are able to have more of a say on how we practice our religion. In the end, we are individuals navigating our faith, and Muslim women, not one looks like another. For me, I have chosen to wear the scarf, for example, and that was a personal choice I made when most of my family actually did not, the women in my family did not wear it. And for others, they choose not to wear it. But the key word in all of this is that it is a choice. And that empowerment we feel of being Muslim women in America is something that we find unique to being in this country. The challenges that I think that you were mentioning, the challenges that we feel that we're facing in this country are very much that our fellow citizens, our fellow Americans, tend to have a preconceived notion or a projection of who we are. And so will kind of put that on us and will kind of then put us in the defensive of having to, we're guilty until proven innocent, that we're not this, we're not oppressed, we don't need somebody to save us. All of these kind of tropes that happen, which in a way are kind of just reinforcing the same patriarchal issues that we were dealing with in our other countries too, where people think they know what we need.
I really enjoyed our discussion with Dr. Masood. Wasn't it enlightening? Now let's take a look back at episode 79 called Gender Disparities in the Mental Health Profession with Dr. Christina Gerges. In this segment, we talk about the current situation today in medicine and what, if any, progress has been made. Would you say that this situation has improved over time or gotten worse? And what are some of the factors that might be contributing to this?
Sure. Unfortunately, the situation has minimally improved over the past 30 years. Yes. So, if you point to, do we have more women in medicine? Yes. Women in medical school? Yes. But is it adequate? No. And, certainly especially after training, we are losing some of these women. And so the cultural issues within medicine are really affecting things. Medicine is a system that is set up for men, particularly for women who are mothers. It's not a friendly system. And it starts from having to work extended shifts in the hospital, lack of time to pump, lack of pumping locations.
Facilities, yeah.
Yeah, no flexible scheduling. Those are things that would be helpful to women and that generally male physicians tend not to have a problem with. And actually, there's data that shows that male physicians and scientists are more likely to have a partner who's at home to help them than women. Women tend to usually have a working partner. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, so for men, sometimes they're more able to attend late night meetings because there's somebody at home taking care of the kids or working longer hours or taking leadership positions. This is one of the big places where medicine needs to change. And then the other big issue is sexual harassment. So sexual harassment continues to be a problem because whether it's a student, a resident, a nurse, or a physician, by and large, almost everybody, when surveyed about this, will tell you that they are afraid to report anything, particularly the lower down in the hierarchy they are. So medical students are terrified of getting kicked out of medical school or getting bad grades or not getting good letters, things like that. And there's actually been stories like that, both in the news and social media, where somebody has reported something. There was actually a story about a male physician in Illinois a few years ago who was fired for essentially being a whistleblower about sexual harassment. So yeah, so these are actually real fears that people have. And then the other thing is that institutions still do not really, I would say they still do not adequately take a stance on sexual harassment. One of the things I found in my research when I was writing that chapter that you mentioned was that ACGME takes a very strong stance for residents regarding fatigue. They've got multiple policies. They mention it like in different places on their website. They have several requirements about the type of education that we have to give residents to teach them about fatigue. We can't overwork them because of the fatigue issues, etc. When it comes to sexual harassment, there's a one-line statement that just says that the program has to have a sexual harassment policy, and it may be the larger institution's policy. So programs don't even have to have anything specific to residents. They can just adopt the hospital policy for sexual harassment.
That seems crazy.
It is. I had to like read it a few times to make sure I was reading it correctly. And same thing, there's an organization for medical schools. That's the same thing. Fatigue is very highly addressed versus sexual harassment very minimally addressed.
That was such an eye-opening episode, and it was exciting to have Dr. Gerges join us on our show. Now let's reflect on a very powerful episode, number 82, called Refreshing Perspectives on Recovery. September is National Recovery Month with Dr. Nzinga Harrison. Here, we discuss unique perspectives on alcohol use disorder.
How is alcohol addiction different? And can you share with us just kind of your view on that addiction?
Absolutely. So you've put your finger exactly on it, which is that one of the things that makes alcohol so dangerous in this country is that it is so firmly embedded as part of our cultural existence. Alcohol use is celebrated. We start raising our kids from the very beginning with anticipation of turning 21 so that you can drink, right? So that you can drink legally. Every movie we see is like partying and alcohol, like to have a good time. Alcohol must be there. We actually ostracize people who don't drink for whatever reason. And so all of those make it incredibly dangerous, because the more embraced a substance is, the harder it is to recognize when there's a problem with that substance. And so I'll just drop a couple of statistics here, which is that whenever we think of death from addiction these days, we think of the opioid crisis and overdose deaths from opioids. But the number one substance in this country that is killing people is cigarettes, tobacco. And the number two substance that is killing people in this country is alcohol. Wow. And part of the reason it's difficult to know that is because alcohol is a long, insidious death.
Right.
whereas opioids kill you tonight. And so it's much easier to kind of make that connection, like heroin killed my brother because my brother was here yesterday and my brother is not here today. Alcohol is also killing our loved ones. It's just happening over 20, 25, 30 years, unless it's like a drunk driving accident. People can kind of make that connection very quickly. And so if we look at alcohol use disorders in this country, I think your listeners might be surprised to know that 80% in COVID especially, but as many as 80% of people are qualifying for risky drinking. And part of risky drinking is binge drinking, which if you have drunk more than 4 drinks in one setting, you're binge drinking. And 4 drinks is 4 ounces of wine. That's one drink. One 12-ounce beer is one drink. One 1-ounce shot of liquor. So if you say make it a double or a triple, you're literally 3 drinks into that 4 drinks for a woman is 5 drinks for a man. And the reason we define binge drinking at 4 drinks in a setting for a woman, 5 drinks for a man is because if you do that more than once a month, we literally can point directly to the physical and psychological negative consequences that come from that level of drinking. It takes a toll on health. And so when we're looking at our college kids that are binge drinking every weekend, it's dangerous. When we're looking at our CEOs that are having 2 stiff drinks every night after work, that's binge drinking potentially every day of the week. And so we conjure up this idea of the quote alcoholic, which is the homeless person with a bottle in a brown bag begging for money on the side of the street, when in reality, a huge portion of people in the United States are qualifying for a diagnosis of mild alcohol use disorder or even moderate alcohol use disorder.
Dr. Harrison is the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Eleanor Health, an innovative company that provides comprehensive, longitudinal outpatient care for individuals who are experiencing opioid and other substance use disorders. You can find more information on Eleanor Health and other related resources in the show notes for that episode. Next, let's reflect on another episode where we talked about helping kids transition to going back to school in person after the pandemic. We learned some amazing evidence-based techniques that help young people cope with stress in episode 101 called Ooh Child, Things Are Going to Get Easier, Managing Pediatric Anxiety with Dr. Crystal Lewis. In this segment, we discuss the importance of self-efficacy in using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to help young people effectively manage anxiety. Dr. Lewis shares perspectives and findings from her own research in this segment.
Some of your most recent research focused on a very important mechanism for the effectiveness of CBT in children from 8 to 17 years old. What is self-efficacy and why is it so important for managing pediatric anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, as I mentioned before, I'm interested in building confidence in children. And self-efficacy is a concept that was coined by Albert Bandura, a well-known psychologist, and it's based in social cognitive theory. It's been around for a long time. Self-efficacy is a person's belief in their capacity to exercise control over things that affect their lives and their general well-being. So we know that self-efficacy is the foundation for being motivated, accomplishing things, and general resilience. And oftentimes anxiety is paired with a belief that you can't handle things that are going to happen. There's a fear in not knowing what is going to happen because how can you prepare for the unknown? If you don't prepare, the outcome will be negative. And so with this mindset, individuals can become very anxious about many different things because we know that many things in life are uncertain and unpredictable. So for individuals with anxiety, lack of self-efficacy may translate to an inability to tolerate or deal with anxious feelings in general. So it's feeling uncomfortable with the unknown, and then feeling uncomfortable with anxious feelings or uncomfortable feelings because there's not a belief that you know how to manage these feelings or manage difficult situations. So this concept is very important in managing pediatric anxiety Because in treatment, we utilize CBT and have kids engage in exposures, as I mentioned earlier. And these exposures help to build general efficacy or confidence for children. Mastery experiences, doing things that are perceived to be hard and difficult, builds one's confidence in themselves. And so, in addition to that, CBT helps kids to realize that they can manage and tolerate these anxious and uncomfortable feelings. And self-efficacy and perceived control is one of these mechanisms that we believe contributes to therapy effectiveness, because within the CBT, within the therapy, they're learning that they can control some of these situations and manage the scary feeling.
Right, right. And I think, isn't that sort of the beauty of CBT, that it's something that the patient can incorporate themselves and that they can be empowered themselves during periods of time without the therapist?
Exactly. It's skill-based. So we're focusing on teaching these specific skills that clients and patients can use when they're out on their own, when the kids are in school. So they're learning strategies to deal with stressors. And so it goes beyond, we'll say, the traditional talk therapy of coming in and talking about something that's bothering you. Talk about it, but then now we're also learning skills so that we can increase confidence and individuals feel confident to handle situations.
Dr. Lewis was an amazing guest to have on our show, with such a wealth of knowledge to share with us on strategies for building confidence and resiliency in our youth, especially during these challenging times. Finally, let's turn to episode 150, called Blazing Trails to Break Down Structural Racism and Improve Black Mental Health, with Dr. Sarah Vinson. What advice do you have for mental health providers who want to make a difference and fight against structural racism? How can they become better educated in cultural humility? That seems to be a theme in a lot of educational approaches. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. How can someone get more involved and start to make a difference if they're not really sure what to do?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And I think sometimes when issues are so big, so entrenched, so complicated, that you can throw your hands up and say, what can I really meaningfully do here? And the answer is a lot. It comes down to looking at your privilege, your position, your skill set, and thinking about how you can leverage it. And it doesn't have to be writing a book or starting a firm. It can be, how can I intentionally mentor and sponsor people who are from groups that are historically marginalized and not given resources, right? It can be something as simple as deciding that as a matter of practice, if you're invited to write a book chapter or submit an abstract to speak at a conference, that you are going to be intentional about involving people in that project and using it as an opportunity to help advance someone's career who may not have anybody in their family who's doing this kind of work, who can sort of mentor and guide them along the process. So I think for people who are mental health professionals, that most of them want to help, and that's why they went into the field in the first place. And I think part of the challenge is understanding that this work is not peripheral or extraneous or anything like that. If we're talking about really shaping population mental health, this is core to the mission. And once you understand that, and start thinking about your place and your privilege, the opportunities to do it are there. They're always going to be there. It's just a matter of staying open and in being committed to taking advantage of them.
Wow. I love your perspective. And I mean, just this interview alone has been so eye-opening and has just been such great information that you've shared with us. So I really thank you so much for all of this, and thank you for being on our show. It was an honor having Dr. Vinson on our show. She is triple board certified in adult, child and adolescent, and forensic psychiatry. Isn't it refreshing to hear such a powerful perspective on how you as a clinician can positively influence your community, both within and beyond the medical field? With your help, we can truly change the world. Well, that concludes our look back at some of the most influential and powerful women in medicine that we've had on our show. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and be sure to join us next time. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the NEI podcast. Please let us know what you'd like to hear more about by leaving a review. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today.